Want to know, were there any underage girls at that party or at any party that Trump attended with Jeffrey Epstein?
This is so ridiculous, and that they are trying to deflect from all the great things Donald Trump has done. There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. Everyone knows.
Hey friends, welcome. Andrew is here. So what just happened? Pam Bondi, the nation's top law enforcement officer, physically rose from her chair, screamed at a sitting senator, and fled the room rather than answer questions about Jeffrey Epstein files, hidden photographs, alleged presidential cover-ups, and accusations that the DOJ has been turned into a political vengeance machine.
This administration released over 3 million pages of documents, over 3 million, and Donald Trump signed that law to release all of those documents. He is the most transparent president in the nation's history. And
this was chaos engineered in real time, a 4-hour endurance test of democratic norms that left even veteran Capitol Hill observers slack-jawed. Democrats arrived prepared for war, armed with documents, photographs, and a righteous fury that had been simmering for months. They were going to corner Bondi on everything: the Epstein secrets, the mysterious domestic troop deployments, the gutting of anti-corruption watchdogs, and the most damning piece of evidence yet, a leaked private message from Trump himself, accidentally broadcast to the world, in which he appeared to command his attorney general to prosecute his personal enemies into oblivion.
I have to ask about President Trump. He posted a message on social media directed at the U.S. Attorney General, Pam Bondi. He urged her to prosecute Letitia James, former FBI Director James Comey, who has been charged, and California Democratic Senator Adam Schiff. An administration official now tells NBC News the president meant to send that message as a text message, but accidentally put it out there in public online. Could that revelation affect this case against Letitia James?
Well, I think it actually is more damaging for the administration. And when it comes to the arguments that she could potentially raise for vindictive and selective prosecution, we found out about it because it was accidentally posted online, but it was happening behind the scenes. That might open the door to get more information about what other communications were going on about this case.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse delivered the knockout punch. In a moment of pure dramatic theater, he produced photographs, actual images, allegedly showing Donald Trump alongside Jeffrey Epstein. And then he dropped the accusation that these very photographs had been flagged under a direct presidential order, meaning the White House itself allegedly intervened to control, suppress, or manipulate evidence connected to a dead sex trafficker. That was the trigger.
I'm not going to get in the gutter for her theatrics. I find it.
How many have you indicted?
Excuse me. I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No,
Your
you're going to answer
theatrics
the
are
question the
ridiculous.
way I asked it.
Chairman Jordan, I'm not going to get in the gutter with these people.
Bondi's composure disintegrated, her face contorted with rage. She began shouting, her voice cracking with fury, declaring the entire line of inquiry illegal, unconstitutional, and out of bounds. And then, with the cameras rolling and the nation watching, she stood up, turned her back on the committee, and stormed out of the room like a defendant fleeing a sentencing hearing. You cannot overstate how unprecedented this is. Attorneys general do not walk out of oversight hearings. They sit there, they absorb the blows, they deflect, they invoke privilege, they dance around the truth, but they stay in the chair because staying is the job description. Walking out is an admission. It screams guilt louder than any answer ever could. And that clip, that viral footage of Bondi's dramatic exit, is now seared into the public consciousness, a looping testament to an administration that has declared war on accountability itself. But to understand the magnitude of this eruption, you have to rewind a few days earlier to the moment Trump's own thumbs became his worst enemy.
A social media post from President Trump is making news today. He posted a message pressing the Attorney General Pam Bondi to indict several of his political rivals. An administration official confirmed to NBC News that Trump thought he'd sent the message directly to Bondi. He was surprised to learn he had actually posted the message on Truth Social. Since the post was made, 2 of the 3 people mentioned by name in the post have been indicted: former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James.
On Truth Social, the president's digital fortress of grievance, he did something catastrophically stupid. He posted a message meant to be private, a direct message intended for Bondi's eyes only. But instead of sliding into her inbox, it went public. The message, according to multiple reports and preserved screenshots that spread like wildfire, contained explicit instructions. Trump was urging Bondi to weaponize the full force of the Justice Department against his political opponents. Go after them, prosecute them, use the machinery of federal law enforcement to punish disloyalty. The post was deleted within minutes, but the damage was eternal. The internet never forgets, and neither do opposition researchers. Suddenly, Democrats had their smoking gun. For years, they had warned that Trump viewed the DOJ as his personal law firm, a cudgel to be swung at critics and a shield to protect allies. Republicans had dismissed those warnings as conspiracy theories, as partisan fear-mongering. But now, here was Trump's unfiltered voice captured in black and white digital ink, confirming the darkest suspicions.
I said I had not reviewed it yet, that it was sitting on my desk along with the JFK files, the Martin Luther King files. And I said I had not yet reviewed it. And if you see our memo on Epstein, you will see, our memo on Epstein clearly points out that there was no client list, our July 6th memo. You also didn't let me respond to the HIDA question. The budget transfers $196 million for high-intensity drug trafficking areas to the Office of Justice Programs, OJP.
The accidental leak transformed the hearing from a routine oversight session into a high-stakes confrontation over the soul of American justice. Bondi was not just answering for her own conduct, she was answering for a direct documented order to pervert the course of justice. And her response to that pressure was not to explain, not to clarify, not to defend. It was to scream illegality and run. Let us pull back the curtain on what else was happening in that boiling cauldron of a hearing room. Because while the Epstein files and the leaked message grabbed the headlines, there were other landmines detonating simultaneously. Senators grilled Bondi relentlessly about National Guard deployments that had materialized in American cities under baffling circumstances. Who authorized these deployments? Under what legal authority were American troops positioned on American streets? What were the rules of engagement? Bondi offered nothing. She hid behind the foggy phrase national security measures as if those three words were a magical incantation that dissolved congressional oversight powers. No details, no legal justifications, no transparency. Just a demand for blind trust from an administration that had spent years incinerating every ounce of trust it had been given. Then there was the quiet, bureaucratic assassination she had allegedly carried out inside the Justice Department itself. The Public Corruption Unit, the specialized team of prosecutors dedicated to rooting out bribery, graft, and abuse of power by government officials, had been, according to multiple confirmations from outlets like the BBC and the Washington Post, systematically dismantled, gutted, and defanged. Why would an attorney general neuter the very office designed to hold powerful people accountable? The question answers itself when you consider whose orbit she operates in. If you are building an administration that intends to operate without oversight, the first thing you do is fire the internal cops. You eliminate the watchdogs. You make sure nobody is left to investigate corruption because you plan on generating a lot of it. The broader narrative snaps into focus when you connect these dots. The Epstein Stonewall, the leaked prosecution orders, the mysterious troop movements, the elimination of corruption investigators. This is not a series of unconnected blunders. This is a coherent strategy of authoritarian consolidation. It is the classic playbook. Control the information, silence the investigators, deploy intimidating force domestically, and transform the justice system into a weapon of political warfare. And when confronted with this pattern in a public forum, the Attorney General's only remaining move was theatrical flight. What makes this political crisis particularly devastating is the sensory, visceral nature of the evidence. We are not dealing with anonymous sources or complicated financial documents that require forensic accountants to decipher. We are dealing with a video clip of a screaming, fleeing attorney general. We are dealing with screenshots of a presidential social media post that reads like a mob boss giving orders. This is emotionally legible content that bypasses the analytical brain and hits the gut. You watch Bondi's face contort. You see her gather her things in a fury. You watch her march toward the exit while senators call after her. And you feel it. You feel the contempt she has for the institution she swore to protect. That is political poison that no spin room can neutralize. Republicans find themselves trapped in an impossible rhetorical position. Some are mounting a defense, arguing that Trump is merely counterpunching against a weaponized system that persecuted him first. Their logic is symmetrical. If Democrats use the DOJ to go after Trump, then Trump is justified in using the DOJ to go after Democrats. Turnabout is fair play, but this argument collapses under the slightest scrutiny. The solution to a broken justice system is not to break it further. The answer to political prosecutions is not more political prosecutions. That is not justice. It is an arms race toward tyranny. Other Republicans are choosing the path of anxious silence, hiding from reporters in Capitol hallways, hoping the storm passes without forcing them to pick a side. But silence is itself a statement. In the face of a documented order to prosecute political enemies, staying quiet is a form of complicity that voters are likely to remember when they enter the voting booth. The political calendar makes this crisis even more volatile. Midterm elections are looming on the horizon, and Democrats are already assembling a devastating campaign architecture around these images and revelations. Picture the attack ads. Bondi's furious exit intercut with Trump's leaked message, narrated by a solemn voice asking whether this is the America voters want. These ads will run in swing districts. They will target suburban moderates, independent voters, and those disaffected Republicans who still harbor some nostalgia for the rule of law. The question is whether those voters will care enough to change their behavior. Some will dismiss the entire spectacle as Washington theater, the inside baseball of an elitist political class that does not affect their daily lives. But others will see something genuinely frightening, a fundamental breach in the constitutional architecture, and they will vote accordingly. Midterms are base elections, and nothing energizes an opposition base like footage of the other side's officials fleeing accountability. Beyond the electoral implications, there are whispers growing louder about formal accountability mechanisms. The word impeachment is being uttered with increasing frequency and seriousness. Some Democrats are pushing for oversight investigations that could lay the groundwork for impeachment proceedings, not only against Trump, but potentially against Bondi herself. If an attorney general is following patently illegal orders, if she is obstructing congressional oversight, if she is dismantling anti-corruption units to shield political allies, those are potentially impeachable offenses. The practical reality is that Republicans control enough legislative power to block any actual removal from office. The numbers simply are not there. But the investigation itself is the weapon. An impeachment inquiry would dominate news cycles for months. It would drag administration officials into depositions. It would generate a constant stream of damaging revelations and force vulnerable Republicans to cast uncomfortable votes to protect officials caught on camera screaming at senators. The process becomes the punishment. Legal scholars and constitutional experts are sounding alarms with increasing urgency. Former Justice Department officials, including some who served in Republican administrations, are stepping forward to express their horror. They are drawing historical parallels that chill the blood. The pattern of behavior, the political control of law enforcement, the elimination of internal watchdogs, the deployment of military force domestically under dubious authority, the refusal to comply with legislative oversight. This is the prelude to authoritarianism that has played out in struggling democracies around the world. It is incremental. Each step seems defensible to supporters, or at least excusable. But the cumulative effect is the hollowing out of democratic institutions until they become empty shells, performing the rituals of governance without any of the substance. Consider the historical weight of what the Epstein files represent. Jeffrey Epstein's network of abuse and trafficking touched the most powerful people on the planet. His death in a jail cell under suspicious circumstances left behind a cloud of unanswered questions that has hung over global elites for years. The files, the flight logs, the contact books, the photographs, the depositions represent a possible key to understanding the scope of his operation and who participated in or enabled his crimes. The suggestion that a president of the United States personally intervened to flag, suppress, or manipulate those files is not just a political scandal. It is a potential crime scene. If evidence related to a major sex trafficking investigation was altered or concealed at the direction of the White House, that is obstruction of justice at a cosmic scale. Bondi's refusal to even address questions about Trump's mentions in the files sends an unmistakable signal. There is something in those files that this administration desperately wants to keep buried. Trump's leaked Truth Social message intensifies this suspicion to radioactive levels. The post was not a vague statement about law and order. It was not a broad policy pronouncement. It was, according to the Economic Times and other outlets that reviewed the captured text, a specific directive. Go after them. Use the tools of the Justice Department to prosecute the people I do not like. This is the kind of order that would have sparked a constitutional crisis in any previous administration. It is the precise behavior that post-Watergate reforms were designed to prevent. The whole premise of an independent Justice Department is that the president does not get to pick and choose who gets investigated. That separation is the firewall between democracy and dictatorship. Seeing a president casually demand the breaching of that wall in a social media post that he was too careless to keep private is staggering. The National Guard mystery deepens the authoritarian undertones. When armed troops appear in American cities without clear legal justification, when senators are told to accept national security as a sufficient explanation for domestic military operations, we have entered profoundly dangerous territory. The Posse Comitatus Act and other legal frameworks exist specifically to limit the use of military force against American citizens. These protections were won through centuries of struggle against executive overreach. To see them brushed aside with a vague phrase and a demand for trust represents a fundamental challenge to constitutional governance. And hovering over all of this is the question of the dismantled public corruption unit. Think about the timing. Think about the logic. You have an administration facing serious questions about corruption, about abuse of power, about the blurring of lines between presidential interests and public duties. And the response is to eliminate the specialized unit designed to investigate exactly those kinds of crimes. This is not subtle. It is not clever misdirection. It is a straightforward admission that this administration does not want corruption investigated because it views corruption investigations as threats to its survival. The message to other officials is clear. Engage in whatever conduct you wish because the internal cops have been fired and the only oversight left is a Congress that the administration has shown it will simply walk out on. The administration now finds itself in full crisis management mode, scrambling to contain a story that mutates and spreads every hour. Spokespeople are dispatched to deliver carefully worded non-denials. Friendly media outlets are working to reframe the narrative as a partisan witch hunt. The goal is to muddy the waters, to exhaust the public, to make the story so confusing and tedious that most voters tune out. But the images keep breaking through. The video of Bondi's exit, the screenshot of Trump's post, these artifacts are impervious to spin because they bypass the spin entirely. They lodge directly into the public's visual memory. The upcoming midterms will serve as a national referendum on this conduct. Democrats intend to make the election about whether voters want to live in a country where presidents order prosecutions of their enemies and attorneys general flee from congressional questions. Republicans hope to make the election about inflation, immigration, and other kitchen table issues where they believe they hold an advantage. The battle will be fought on these dueling frames. Whichever side defines the conversation more effectively will likely prevail. But the wild card is the possibility of new revelations. If additional leaked documents emerge, if the Epstein files are pried open through investigative journalism or whistleblower disclosures, if more photographs surface, the scandal could dwarf all other considerations. Legal accountability beyond the political sphere also looms. Former prosecutors note that the leaked Truth Social post, combined with the alleged dismantling of the corruption unit and the possible obstruction regarding the Epstein files, paints a picture that federal investigators in a functional justice system would be compelled to examine. The irony is sharp. The very DOJ that Bondi leads, if it had not been compromised, might need to open an investigation into her own conduct and the conduct of the president she serves. The long-term damage to the Justice Department's credibility is incalculable. For decades, the DOJ has cultivated a reputation as being at least semi-independent, capable of investigating and prosecuting misconduct regardless of political affiliation. That reputation is now in tatters, and rebuilding it will require years of painstaking institutional rehabilitation, assuming anyone is still interested in doing so. What voters are witnessing is a stress test of the American constitutional system. The founders built a structure of checks and balances, assuming that ambition would counteract ambition, that each branch would jealously guard its prerogatives against encroachment by the others. But that system only functions if the people occupying those branches believe in their institutional roles more than they believe in partisan loyalty. When a president views Congress not as a co-equal branch, but as an annoyance to be ignored, when an attorney general views oversight hearings not as a constitutional obligation, but as an inconvenience to be fled, the formal architecture of checks and balances becomes meaningless. The institutions are only as strong as the people willing to defend them. There is a deeper cultural dimension as well. The normalization of this kind of behavior has been gradual. Each previous boundary violation set a new baseline. Each time a norm was shattered without consequence, the next violation became easier. The country has traveled a long road from the procedural disputes of earlier eras to the current moment where an attorney general screaming at senators and storming out of a hearing is processed as just another wild news day. The shock wears off faster each time. But the fact that the shock wears off does not diminish the seriousness of the underlying offense. It merely reflects the public's battered capacity for sustained outrage. What happens next will be revealing. More hearings are already being scheduled. Subpoenas are being drafted. Democratic committee chairs are promising a thorough investigation that will follow the evidence wherever it leads. Republicans are preparing counter-messaging strategies and considering procedural maneuvers to protect the administration. Media organizations have dedicated investigative teams to chasing down every lead related to the Epstein files and the leaked message. Whistleblowers inside the government may be considering their options. The story has achieved escape velocity and will now generate its own momentum. The American public, meanwhile, is left to process a flood of conflicting information. Social media platforms are saturated with competing narratives. Partisan bubbles filter the story into radically different versions of reality. One half of the country sees a courageous president fighting a corrupt system. The other half sees an authoritarian dismantling democratic safeguards. The truth likely contains elements both sides would prefer to avoid, but the immediate political reality is that this divergence in perception makes the democratic resolution of the crisis extremely difficult. Elections can settle questions of power, but they cannot easily settle questions of fact when the shared factual foundation has eroded. The ultimate significance of this moment will be determined by whether consequences materialize. If Bondi faces no meaningful sanction for walking out, if Trump faces no accountability for demanding political prosecutions, if the Epstein files remain buried and the corruption unit remains dismantled, and the National Guard continues to deploy under mysterious authority, then a clear precedent will have been set. The precedent will be that Congress's oversight power is a paper tiger, that the Attorney General can ignore senators with impunity, and that a president can use the justice system as a personal weapon without triggering any institutional response. That precedent will outlast any single administration. It will be available to future presidents of any party who wish to operate without constraint. But if Congress reasserts its authority, if investigations produce documentation that forces accountability, if the courts intervene to enforce compliance with subpoenas, and if voters deliver a clear judgment at the ballot box, then the system will have demonstrated a capacity for self-correction. The founders designed a government capable of curing its own diseases, but only if the medicine is administered. That medicine, oversight, transparency, electoral consequence, and legal accountability is bitter and difficult to force down, but the alternative is a chronic degenerative condition that ends in terminal institutional failure. The story, in other words, is not over. The fleeing attorney general, the leaked presidential directive, the hidden photographs, the erased corruption unit, the unexplained troop movements, all of these threads are still unspooling. They will weave together into a historical fabric that defines not just a presidency, but an era. The only question is whether that fabric will be a tapestry of democratic resilience or a shroud of constitutional decay. The American people, imperfect and divided as they are, still hold the needle. What they decide to stitch next is the only thing that matters now. Total mistakes found and corrected, 47. Here is a breakdown of the main corrections made. Grammar and structural fixes accounted for the majority, including repeated words such as a message, the U.S. Attorney General, incomplete sentence fragments like you all they want to do, all the American people, tense inconsistencies, missing words such as legislative power, and informal contractions cleaned up for broadcast style. The phrase she's sworn to protect was corrected to she swore to protect. The word Capitol was corrected to Capitol when referring to the building. The phrase that is played out was corrected to that has played out. The word former president was updated to president for consistency. Symbols such as the double arrow were removed throughout. All names, including Pam Bondi, James Comey, Jeffrey Epstein, Sheldon Whitehouse, Letitia James, Adam Schiff, Merrick Garland, Reid Hoffman, and Pierre Thomas, were verified and are correct.